Now, what the U.S. military actually looks like today and what the situation is for people who are in the military and the way that they now see the world and how it affects them. This is going to be a very high-level discussion and greatly oversimplified, so everything I say, take it in that context. There's a lot of detail that I'm going to be omitting here. But the first thing you have to understand when you talk about the U.S. Air Force in terms of military space is there are two divisions of the U.S. Air Force. There are actually a lot more, but these are the two that really matter for purposes of our discussion. There's Air Combat Command, which is the people who run the fighter planes and the bombers and the other aircraft. And there's Space Command, which runs the satellites and the launchers like EELV, and in the last few years, they've now been given responsibility for the ICBM force as well. So they really come from two completely different worlds. And it's hard to overemphasize the difference between the two. When you speak of the Air Force, basically, Space Command works for the Air Force. Air Combat Command is the Air Force. There's also this organization which has an overlapping role and responsibilities called STRATCOM, Strategic Command. They used to be the Strategic Air Command, but they really lost most of their power since the end of the Cold War. But they're still responsible for long-range global strike, and they're the people who would carry out any sort of response if we ever did end up in a full-scale nuclear war, which no one really expects anymore. They're no longer solely within the Air Force. They're now a joint command, so they're now in the Navy's ballistic missile submarines as well, and they're what's called a unified command, and therefore they go across the services. Now, one thing that military people can tell you, which is very different from what you will hear in most of the media today, the U.S. military today is very overstretched in terms of its capabilities, and to a large degree, the military is not in good shape. If you look at Air Combat Command, for example, the fighter force, the procurement of new fighter aircraft dropped to almost zero after the Cold War during the Clinton years. It's increased slightly since then, and that they're now procuring new F-15s and F-16s at a very low rate. But the result of this is essentially that the U.S. fighter force has aged greatly, and you have a lot of very old airplanes now. Now, at the same time, a new airplane being developed called the F-22, it's been in development for over 20 years. It was designed during the Cold War, and it was designed to fight a very specific type of battle with the Cold War enemy, the Soviet Union, which really no longer exists anymore. So as a result, it's got a lot of high technology, a lot of capabilities that may or may not be applicable in today's environment, and it's a very expensive airplane. It's now $360 per copy. As a result, and possibly also partially as a cause, the procurement of the F-22 has been greatly cut back. The U.S. military is now planning to buy something like a third the number of F-22s that had originally been planned. And then there's the Joint Strike Fighter, which is basically the Swiss Army knife of military airplanes. It's supposed to replace the A-10 subsonic tank killer, the F-16, the F-18, the F-117 stealth fighter, the Harrier. They're even talking about versions of it which will do things like anti-submarine warfare, electronic warfare. People have even suggested hanging pods on the wings so they can do medevac with it. The Joint Strike Fighter was supposed to be a low-cost alternative to the F-22, although there have been some cost overruns in the JSF program recently. There's also some questions that the performance of the aircraft may be compromised by the fact that it's been designed to do so many missions. Even the conventional takeoff and landing version, which does not have the lift engine, it still does not really have the center of gravity where ideally it would be for a fighter if it did not have to meet all these other requirements. Going beyond fighters, the U.S. bomber fleet is currently the smallest it has been at any time since the Great Depression. Nevertheless, based on the latest four-year review, the U.S. Air Force is planning to retire half of its active duty B-52 bombers in the next few years. All of its F-117 stealth fighters and all the U-2s, not because they don't want these airplanes or they don't have a valuable role to fill, but simply because the Air Force no longer has the money to maintain them and to procure the YF-22 and do all the other things they want to do. They're also going to be getting rid of 114 KC-135 tankers. And the tanker replacement program is currently derailed because it turned out that the only domestic supplier for aircraft in that category is Boeing, which got into this ethical problem. And then there's Airbus, which is French, and we aren't getting along with the French very well these days. So, gee, they were in the place of buying a tanker from the crooks or the enemy, and as a result, nothing is getting bought in the near future. So basically, the U.S. Air Force is being very constrained in terms of its ability to carry out missions. Altogether, over the next few years, they're going to be retiring 1,124 airplanes. That's out of a total of about 11,000 they have. That's about a 1.3% reduction. And, excuse me, yes, excuse me, 10.3. And in case you think the U.S. Navy is going to pick up the slack, the Navy is in many ways in worse shape than the Air Force is. They got rid of all their A-6 medium attack aircraft a few years ago and replaced them with the F-18, and they're going to be replaced with the Joint Strike Fighter. But the truth is, neither the F-18 nor the JSF has the same combination of range and payload that the A-6 did. So as a result, the amount of punch that you get from a aircraft carrier has diminished drastically. Even more troubling from the Navy's point of view, while they're maintaining 11 carriers on active duty, they're having a lot of trouble maintaining enough air wings to staff all those carriers. And you know, if you could send a carrier to sea, but you don't have the airplanes to send with it, there's no point in even going. The point I'm getting at here basically is not only that the military is in bad shape today, but they're looking for ways that they can do things more economically and not have to spend as much money to maintain overseas bases and perhaps aircraft carriers and other things, which is why they're starting to look into things like precision global strike. The idea of putting a conventional munition on either an ICBM or a reusable vehicle. There are obviously very great differences in capability between what these two give you. It's really questionable whether putting conventional warheads on ICBMs actually makes sense economically, but there are a lot of people in the US military who are looking at that. Right now, Stratcom is trying to get money to put 100 conventional warheads on Trident ballistic missiles so that they could have the U.S. Navy carrying 2 conventional ballistic missiles on every one of their submarines out on patrol. The problem with this being only about 1/3 of those submarines are at their patrol locations and ready to fire missiles at any time. And the Trident missile does not have true global range. So even out of those 1/3, them are not going to actually be in a position to attack a particular target that you might want to hit. So what you would actually get out of this capability would be only perhaps 2 missiles that were ready to hit a given target with 4 warheads each, total of 8 warheads at any given time. And the projected cost for this system is $500 million. So, as I said, you know, the cost effectiveness of this is really questionable. And, you know, a lot of people would say they really need to be looking at reusable vehicles, but there are some issues in their procurement program there, which we'll talk about later. Yes?
Take a question. Why is this being allowed or encouraged at such a dangerous time for this country's history and future?
Are you talking about conversion or?
All of these military reductions and compromised military solutions.
Well, there are a lot of reasons. There was the build down from the Cold War. There's also the fact that we're consuming a lot of money fighting the war in Iraq, and we're also consuming a lot of money in a lot of domestic spending programs because the Bush administration, frankly, has made the liberal Democrats look like tightwads in terms of domestic spending. So there just hasn't been a lot of money that the U.S. government has seen fit to give the military to maintain these capabilities. In addition, you know, I mean, the military must shoulder a lot of the blame itself. I mean, it's gotten into this procurement situation where we can't develop a new fighter in less than 20 years, and therefore, you know, you have to pay the engineers every year while they're working on that and doing the development, so the development cost escalates. Therefore, since you spent so much money on development, you have to cut down the number that you're planning to procure, which means the cost per vehicle goes up, which just spirals into this very bad situation.
Well, isn't there another aspect of it, which is that the threats have changed radically since 9/11, and you know, if we're fighting Al-Qaeda, we're not going to fight them with B-52s.
Well, we've been using a lot of B-52s in Afghanistan.
Yes, but the threat is asymmetric now, and you know, it calls more for missiles and cruise missiles or other things that we do have.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion as to what sort of weapons we should be buying, and therefore that slows down the procurement process as well. Okay, this is the point where we're going to get into the role-playing stuff. And as I said, I'm not really sure how this is going to go because this was really designed for a larger group of people with more dynamics, but
people who are probably even now wandering the halls trying to find this room.
Well, they haven't made it past our door yet, so.
okay, half of you are going to be Combat Command, and half of you are going to be in Space Command. And no members of Congress. Okay, first of all, before we begin, what I'd like everyone to do is just close your eyes for a moment. And we're going to do a little visualization exercise.
We might also visualize a realistic use of the time here, in the sense that if you think about your plan size with your assumption of having 12 or 15 people here, there might be time to sit back and, as you should in any tactical environment, no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. And your battle plan has just met the enemy, which is this room. So
Don't you want to play, Jim?
I don't want to. Well, I don't want to.
Turn off the video.
He
No,
wants
I
to
don't
use
want
his
to
time.
play.
He wants to use his time.
We get into a plan assumptions which are no longer valid. So are you showing us that this is like the way the DoD operates?
Well, no, it's just that I don't have a better plan at the moment.
But you do have good, you make up in quality what you lack in quantity, so let's go ahead and see what we'll do. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, first of all, I'd like everyone to close their eyes for a moment. And we're going to do a little visualization exercise. I want to visualize just blackness. Empty your mind for a moment. And then imagine a box in the middle of that blackness. Just an ordinary cardboard box. It's open at top. Now, I want you to think about all of your own personal baggage, your resume, your job, your political views, and you know, take out your driver's license, and you're just going to put all those things into that box. And now we're going to close the lid, and we're going to put that box aside for the remainder of the exercise. I mean, don't worry about your personal stuff. I mean, it's safe. You get the box back at the end of this. Has everyone done that? Okay. Now, I'm going to hand out these envelopes.
Can we open our eyes?
Yes, you can open your eyes now. Now, these envelopes represents an identity. On the outside, there's a call sign. I mean, if you're in Air Combat Command, generally people refer to one another by their call signs as much or more often than their names. People in Space Command generally don't have call signs, but I've given you them anyway because this is sort of a representation of the way you think of yourself and the way other people think of you. Think of it as a nickname, if you will. And inside, there are also a number of patches which represent some things that you might have done during your career. And just take a look at the patches, and they'll give you a little idea of who you are, and think about what sort of person would wear patches like these and what their values would be and how they might see the world. And once you've done that, then I'd like everyone to just turn to the person next to you and just introduce yourself and just tell them who you are and what it is you do. And
I've done space operations that have made things happen.
And I'm Spock in Space Command, and I get it up and keep it.
Is this my name?
yes,
My name is Ripper, and I seem to be
But I like the I get it up
an
and keep it.
aggressor and an
Because I'm getting older, that's
An aggressor and a what?
ego driver, and I'm a fighting eagle.
I'm Mad Dog, and I'm a fighter pilot, and I've been bombing places in Iraq and
Sounds like
taking out, I'm, busting Saddam, jihad this.
good for you.
So you get to travel the world, go to strange exotic places, and meet wonderful and unusual people and kill
Fly
them.
really
And kill
hot
them.
planes, yeah.
now you notice the people on this side of the room are quite a bit more aggressive than the people on this side. I mean, these people have the cool nicknames. You're, maybe a little bit nerdy. I'd like to read a little passage. This was actually written by General Horner, who commanded the U.S. Air Force attack during Desert Storm. And he's talking about his experience in Space Command. And he said, "Space people are interesting. By that, I mean that most of them don't seem very much like most of us. Not X-Files different, but definitely leaning towards strange. For one thing, you'd think that space people would be the most flexible, daring, and future-oriented individuals you're likely to meet. In fact, that is not the case. Most of them are incredibly cautious. Many bad things can go wrong in their world, and when they do, the results can be catastrophic. Even a little glitch can be a big problem when the glitch is 22,500 miles above the surface of the Earth. Each space launch is a unique event, just as it was 40 years ago. Every time space folks put up a satellite on tons of explosions on a Every time space folks put up a satellite on tons of explosive fuel, their memories retain the scars of huge explosions on the launch pad or shortly after liftoff. In other words, space folks are the most conservative group you will find. They may make Swiss bankers look like druggy surfers. They agonize over every aspect of their trade. The design and construction of satellites can take many years. There are inevitable delays, often measured in years. Nothing is left to chance. Once the bird is in orbit and functioning, it is turned over to the satellite flyers, men who work in windowless rooms in front of flickering computer screens. They are backed by the men and women stationed around the globe, usually at lonely, faraway locations such as island atolls and desert wastelands, who operate the radio net that communicates with the orbiting vehicles. In the control rooms, you'll find computer geeks, people who are among the most highly trained, motivated, educated, disciplined, and competent professionals in our military. When you enter the room, you notice the hush. The hum of air conditioners is about the only sound present until you begin to realize there's also a click, click, click of computer keys. When there's a problem, the space pilots, that's the noise space pilots make when they fly their vehicles. Occasionally there'll be an anomaly that the operator cannot fix, say an overheating transistor as the sun bakes the side of the bird facing its rays. The operator desperately tries to coax the bird to turn so the heat dissipating material will cover the affected part, but to no avail. When the operator finally realizes that he or she can't resolve the anomaly on his or her own, he turns to the supervisor on duty for help. They don't yell help or mayday or SOS. They look up from their screens and wave their hand and beckon their leader to the station. The expert then quietly rises from her own computer station, walks to the unhappy operator, and bends down to look at the flashing red numbers to which the operator is pointing on the computer screen. Now, this might sound very much like, Mission Control in Houston or JPL, and it is very much the same sort of mentality. I mean, people from Space Command may very well look forward to going to JPL when they retire, where just as Air Combat Command people may go to the airlines. It's a very great cultural difference. I can't overemphasize this too much. I mean, people in the military, at the end of the day, you go and play crud. Does anyone here know what crud is? It's hard to describe if you haven't actually seen it. It's a game played on a pool table, except instead of using cues to shoot the pool balls, you use your hands. And unlike pool, which is a fairly safe game unless you're in a bar brawl, crud entails a good chance of getting broken fingers. So, you guys are going to leave here today, you're going to go back and you're going to play crud. You guys are probably going to go and play video games. D&D. I mean, you guys will probably then go out to the bar and try to pick someone up and have sex. You guys will probably go home and have cyber sex. And you'll each make fun of the other one for what they're doing. There's also a very great difference when you think about space. I mean, to a large extent, people in Air Combat Command no longer really think about space unless they're trying to get into the NASA astronaut program, because, with the cancellation of Dinosaur and all the other military programs over the years, that instinct has been sort of drilled out of them. I mean, the idea of military space is something that you consider to be part of Space Command. Space Command, on the other hand, frankly, is very much like JPL in another sense. You're very anti-manned space. I mean, if your idea is if you put a human on something, they're probably going to screw it up, and it's a lot easier for you sitting in your mission control room to control something if there's nobody there. Now, with that in mind, I'd like to get some feedback from each of you as to how you think these groups would think about what's going on with space today. I mean, first of all, we have this problem with military satellites, and the costs have just been spiraling out of control, and of course, you guys get all the blame for it. So what do you think the opinion is from Space Command on that?
Well, just too many officers are getting put in charge of our people. They should just stay in their own little sand file and promote from within, within our own group.
So how do we solve this problem?
Send them off and kill off half of them.
And what about you guys? I mean, what do you think about the fact that the Air Force is now spending billions of dollars for satellites that they can't launch?
Sounds like the same thing they've been doing always.
Wasn't there the same thing at the time of the Wright stuff, between pilots and then the orderly space business on the other side and so on? And somebody has to pay for all this, and it's going to be the American taxpayer.
Mm-hmm.
And if the taxpayer is not inspired by something, he's going to say, screw this, don't launch any more of those. I don't relate to what's going on up there. And look at the enthusiasm of the last mission. People relate to heroic people who go up in space and fix things and do things. And what Bigelow said this morning, there is a limit to what you can do with robots. And at some point, you're going to need, us, Mad Dog and me, to go up and fix your
In the military, though, in this environment, that's not an option. There is no longer an option for military manned space, even though there are occasional study groups and
And
websites.
recruiting commercials showing, Air Force girls.
The unpublished manuscript of history of the Air Force manned space program, from MOL to Blue Gemini to Shuttle. The title of the book is
Mm-hmm.
Black and Blue, which represents both space, Air Force, and the Air Force has wound up.
Okay, this is
Being beaten up.
this is actually one of the points that I was hoping to make out of this exercise. I mean, that's exactly the case. People in Space Command have the idea that, they're going to do unmanned space forever. And as you say, that just doesn't turn on the pilots, as it were. And
I'll fly it to space if it has wings. You can get me back and land me here with wings, If you need us to go up there and do some pilot work.
right now,
She's not ever going to sit in a spacecraft where you got to brush the monkey shit off the seat before you get in.
right now, Space Command does have a military space plane of sorts that they're looking at. It's used to be Ares. It's now the hybrid launch vehicle, unless they've changed the name again this week.
That's only to scare the Russians.
I just came from Wright, Pat, and after talking to people there, as best as I can determine, the goal of the hybrid launch vehicle is to replace EELV. The idea is, as one officer told me, we've gotten all the cost reductions we can out of EELV, which isn't saying much. I mean, they've gotten no cost reduction. They finally realized sort of that it was a mistake and they need to move on to something, but they still have the idea that what they need is an EELV class vehicle. And they're talking about building HLV in 2 or 3 versions, a light version, a medium version, and maybe if they need a heavy version. Does this sound familiar? It's basically an EELV replacement, and their goal is to eventually get the access to space down to $2,000 per pound. That's their idea of cheap access to space.
Space Command, what we're seeing is that although we serve pilots in their flight functions, we're also seeing where we're using Space Command assets to fly UAVs, unmanned vehicles, and armed vehicles. And then so we're seeing we're finally getting to the point where the pilots are only needed because we need to have some kind of cheap, easily reproducible computers to put into these fighting machines because we couldn't communicate with them. And now that we're getting more and more systems like that we can actually do remote flying and remote fighting with vehicles. That's a good way to go. But we have to keep our space assets safe for that, and that's what I guess that's the big issue that he wants to go to, is that we currently have a very asymmetric capability over the rest of the world in terms of the Space Command assets. So they allow, when we have to, they allow the meat computers to fly combat missions with 5 or 10 times the efficiency, without space systems.
Exactly.
Vacations.
So from your point of view, protecting space assets is the key to everything you do.
Well, they've got to protect them, because without them, it doesn't matter how many pilots, they're all dead meat.
They're all blind.
Without space assets, and it's good to rub that in once in a while.
Now, from your point of view, what is the most important thing that the Air Force can do? Is it protecting space assets, or is it breaking things and killing people?
Breaking things and killing people that are breaking our things and killing our people. And in case of, all the space assets being wiped out, pilots still have eyes, planes can still fly, and we can still do some damage. Say there's a giant solar flare and you don't have anything up there to work with and fly your little robo-warrior planes. You've got to have people,
And now, if there's a disagreement between the two groups, and it comes down to a head-to-head fight at the Pentagon level, again, which one of you two groups is going to come up on top?
The pilots
We are much tougher than them.
and they promote their own people to the power.
I'm in business, and I always think of, okay, we have all these ideas and we think they're great and so on, but where is the competition in all this, okay? If the Chinese go through the idea of building a human base on the moon, we have to have a human base on the moon, okay? And it doesn't matter-
Why is that?
Well, because it's going to capture so the imagination, it will have so much strategic value, and it will have so much value in terms of exploration, of learning all the things we have to learn about space.
Okay,
Because we don't understand what's out there.
okay, you're stepping out of character here, but that's okay. Let's just address that question. Okay, from
It's not a concern.
from your point of view, from Space Command, are you concerned about them going to the moon?
When you send, no, because when you send people into space, they have to bring your oxygen, your food, your reading material along with you, and you also bring your misconceptions about space. And the pilots think about space as just a higher arena for combat. The high ground is the term that's used a lot, and people who operate in space know that it's not the high ground. The high ground is a fortress that you can shoot down on people below you, can roll rocks down on them. You're in a good position on the high ground. If you're in space, you're a sitting duck. No protection. Everyone knows where you are, and they can hit you more easily than you can hit them. So by pilots bringing and pilot experience, and people who have read military history, through false analogies, the analogies that people learn to survive as pilots, they make not just bad decisions, but absolutely wrong decisions about what's important.
So his being on the moon is not going to affect your satellites at all?
It's not going to, I don't think he's being on the moon, it's not going to affect our satellites. And
What about you from Air Combat Command? I mean, are you worried about him being on the moon?
the Chinese on the moon?
But they can't get me from the moon, can they?
No, I mean, it's a purely symbolic thing. I mean, back during the Apollo days, it might have been a political threat, but on the military level, there's nothing that the Chinese are going to do on the moon, certainly when they're launching ELVs, that's going to damage anything that's of U.S. military interest.
Okay,
Now-
let me bounce back there, the ball with Jim. If we have a human, to get humans to the moon, to survive there, in the process of doing that, we're going to develop new energy systems, new water resource systems, new air quality control systems, new environmental systems. We're going to have a huge industry that those guys are not going to develop because they're just pushing buttons and blowing things up out there. In the meantime, we're going to learn the next generation of an industrial base that's going to get us from the moon to Mars to other exploration. It's going to change the Earth too in the process. And that's what we're all about.
Yeah, but NASA did that 40 years ago. I mean, does it scare you guys?
No, we don't have any of that today.
Well, we have one thing about people in the space operations and the control center. Part of the reason they're so rigid in Horner's book is because they are remarkably superficial and shallow in their real understanding of spaceflight. That people come into the space field as they come into the pilot field, they come into a culture that has a long tradition, a long history. Every pilot knows how they're supposed to act and what's expected of them, up to and including dying. People in the space business come into it, they might be interested in space, but they don't know much about space when they're outside, when they're civilians. They come into an operational facility area and they're given a book, what to do when. And it's just a cookbook, and they're just cookbook followers. And people like that in the space business, and that's what most operators are like, can't be expected to like straying from the expected things that could happen or going with the number of pages that they're trained to follow. People who build the satellites, they're somewhere else. They get called in the middle of the night if something goes wrong. But just like you said, they call for help. But most people operating military satellites are not JPL workers who have been involved with that spacecraft for 15 years. They've been involved with that spacecraft for 15 weeks or 15 months if they're lucky. And because of that, their depth of their robustness is very shallow. So they become fearful of unusual things. And so the initiative, human initiative for pilots, to some degree as a space operator, I would envy that because we have a hard enough time keeping what we're given operating to try something new, unusual. Pilots always want to do something different and want the satellite to be somewhere else. They want to have direct links from the satellite. We can't let the pilots get involved in our sandbox because, well, it's not in the cookbook.
Okay, let's go beyond this for a moment and start talking about weapons in space, or weapons from space. I mean, right now, there's a lot of talk about this new mission called Prompt Global Strike. The U.S. military would like to have the ability to land a conventional smart munition on a target anywhere in the world within less than an hour. I mean, this is not something that you can do with long-range bombers. It's not something you can do with tactical aircraft unless your enemy just happens to be sitting right next to your air base. It's something that requires some sort of long-range, rocket-powered vehicle to take your weapon halfway around the world in 40 minutes.
Yeah, it's the anti-Bin Laden missile, because he only spends 2 hours at one place, so you have to hit him before he gets to a place before he leaves it.
Exactly. Now, how's and reacting to this? You want to put it on missiles, right?
Those are our missiles, but it's not. It doesn't interfere with any space systems.
So it's something you'll do, but it's not your top priority.
We have a lot of missiles that aren't carrying thermonuclear weapons. Not all. This would be just one other set. There's other missiles that already don't carry thermonuclear.
Huh, so whose department is that?
The missiles
Well,
are space.
right now, the Global Strike mission is owned by STRATCOM, which, as I said, used to be Strategic Air Command. It's lost most of its power. Strategic Air Command used to run the Air Force before the fighter pilots took over. Now it's a unified command, which they're in the ICBM silos, they're in the ballistic missile submarines, but they also work very closely with space Space Command actually develops and,
The Air Force Space Command is a subsidiary to U.S. Stratcom. It used to be that there was a U.S. Space Command and a U.S. Strategic Air Command. They are combined, so that there's no, above U.S. Space Command, there's no longer above Air Force Space Command, there's no longer a U.S. unified command called Space Command. It's now Stratcom. And the commanding generals of Stratcom tend to be bomber pilots. And then just another version of meat computers.
but again, to actually get a major program through and funded, it needs support from Air Combat Command, because at the top levels of the Pentagon, they're in most of the key positions. Yes.
Stepping out of your role play for a minute, I have had the opportunity to talk to 6 Space Command officers, lieutenant colonel and above. I've had graduate students, 2 Stratcom officers, captain and above, 4 Air Command officers, and 1 U-2 pilot. And they tell me things offline and privately. So together, they all feel that they are not understood with their mission by the American people, and clearly not by Congress, who does not have a grasp on what their needs are and what their future missions are.
Mm-hmm.
The Air Command, the Space Command guys are absolutely wedded to the mission that they have to do everything and anything possible. They do use the high ground term. They do say they have to protect military and commercial satellites. They realize the U.S. economy is totally based on satellite communications, and it is their mission at all costs, all technology, all engineering, to protect these satellites from being taken out, and they feel that they are not yet capable of being taken out, but this is coming up, and we're kind of asleep at the wheel and not going fast enough to do this.
Okay.
They don't compete against each other in terms of a service rivalry, from what I can tell, but they clearly are upset that they're not funded for their mission, that they do not have a clear understanding with the American people of what they're doing and why they have to do it. The U-2 pilot is so secretive about what he does. He flies out of a base in California. He's hardly ever home with his family. He's on call all the time, and he says, I can't tell you where I fly, but my missions are often 18 hours. So you can figure what the speed of a U-2 is and where he's going. He's trying to arrange me a tour of a U-2 base, but so far that hasn't happened. And I've also had missile launchers from Moncrief that wanted to do a tour for our North Dakota staff, and my department had turned it down. And he's on silo duty 3 days a week. So I don't see the inter-Air Force rivalry. I see a lot of focus on Congress and funding, and the American people have no clue about what the risks are, that the risks are not told to the American people, and Congress doesn't really get it, where the funding would be a lot more for the different kinds of hardware that they need, and the different kinds of mission equipment, the rapid deployment space vehicle that they claim they need. All of they're absolutely wedded to technology and hardware that is just not here because the funding isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I'm in a real small universe here. I know this doesn't represent, even 5% of the Air Force, but that's just my personal experience.
Yes, I mean, I didn't mean to imply that there was an active war going on. It's simply that at the highest levels at the Pentagon level, whenever there's a budget battle, if it's to a choice between funding a new large space system and buying more F-22s,
See, I've heard.
the decision almost always goes in the direction of the F-22s.
Yeah, I don't hear that from them. I hear there should not be a budget battle about this. We need this for all of these sectors of the Air Force to keep the American economy and the country going. And the problem is that there are these budget battles, that the funding isn't what is needed. That's the level of what I'm hearing.
Well, the problem is that the way to protect these assets is a subject of national debate.
And there isn't any.
There is plenty
So
of debate.
Ed, did you have an
Not
idea
within this
about a
little world.
pro-frontier policy that's saleable to U.S. military leaders? You said this was going
Well-
to be the goal of this workshop, but do you have an idea what that type of policy would be?
Well, I was thinking suggesting that we could discuss that and find out exactly what sort of consensus is possible to build within the community. We can do that to some degree, even though we have a lot fewer people here than I was hoping for. But we can now move out of the role-playing thing, which I think we're pretty much done with. So go ahead.
Years ago, I was just starting this research about, you know, the space new companies and stuff, and I was visiting my mom in Oklahoma because I was going to see rocket plane, talking about NASA. And I said, what do you think NASA should be doing? And she said, I think it should be making our country secure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what a lot of people actually think even NASA should do. Not even, you know, the military space program. I think people are just actually unaware of how space dependent they are. And maybe we should have a day without satellites and see how people like that.
We had one not too long ago. Partially.
I mean, I don't know. Plus you have all these people who are sort of space frontier, space settlement people are just sort of horrified by the concept of anything military going on in space.
Well, one of the points that I was trying to drive at with this discussion of space combat versus air combat command is that if we are ever going to get to the point where we have a real military space plane, you know, a manned piloted vehicle, very frequent low-cost access to orbit, as opposed to an EELV replacement, as Spacecom is talking about now, which side of the Air Force does it seem it's going to be coming from most likely?
Probably going to be coming from our side.
Starfighter.
Which means then that we need to find ways to talk to the people in Air Combat Command and not just to the people in Spacecom. I mean, this is not to put down Space Command at all. It's simply that, you know, the Air Combat Command people are the people who are most likely to be receptive to this sort of idea, and ultimately they're going to have the final say when it comes to the budget decisions at the top levels of the Pentagon anyway.
Who is the top general of Air Command? We know General Lord, but who's over at Air Command or
Lord
Stratcom?
is retired now.
Yeah, but I mean, we know Space Command. I mean, I don't know who's in the other division.
And they're in like
The name slips my mind at the moment. But you know,
A session that starts in half an hour, so better
sure.
prepare for.
Anybody do a data stick? I have my space power presentation, but about a 2 meg Acrobat file. If you want, then I can copy it to anybody's data sticks if they want to.
oh, that works fine.
I have a data, it's in my room, I'd love to.
Well, I'm gonna have this. I'll have it all through tonight.
I'll run up to my room.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to
When
that
you leave.
session
After
at 4 too.
after the
Slight break here.
banquet.
Ed, how do you
After
get
this
how do
ends,
you
I'll run up to my room and get my stuff.
get
This is the
to
it's
appeal
not the
to
Tiger
the air command,
symbol of space.
combat command?
Well,
Sitting there.
I've had a lot of good luck talking to people in Air Combat Command on a one-to-one level. The problem is you can't convince a huge organization like that by talking to everyone on a one-to-one level, not within a finite lifetime.
Some of the discussion reminds me of sort of a déjà vu impression, if you forgive the French. Of,
Okay, here are the pacifists.
I'm sorry.
Now, so-
We were asking somebody for money.
Did you get
And we
it?
didn't get any.
Oh, well, in that case, it's unforgivable.
We got a promise for later in the year, but that, you know, I can't bring that to the bank.
So there was a similar discussion.
If we're your idea of pacifist, you really.
Go on.
There was a similar discussion in the early days of computer networking. You know, everything the internet does, you could do with putting 100 big mainframes in Omaha in somebody's cave. Okay? The problem is that it didn't happen that way. And it didn't happen that way because there was some visionary, some visionary work on the part of people at RAND and people in the Pentagon and at ARPA. And bunch of hackers took control of that and started inventing things that they got fired for, like electronic mail.
Mhm.
You know, the people who started doing electronic mail were fired by major universities.
Okay, let me just take a couple minutes to bring Bob and Rick up to speed on what we've been talking about.
Jock said leave for 4 o'clock.
Sure, feel free to
But
drop
I,
out.
I lived through exactly that kind of thing, and we know who won. I mean, you know.
Well, I mean,
Chinese
The
people won.
hackers always win.
How do you protect satellites against hackers?
With hackers.
How do you protect the functions of satellites? And that's the issue of weaponization is the correct strategy for that.
We-
You prepare yourself to replace the satellites
You can be
quickly and easily.
I don't
and
think
cheaply.
so.
All right?
That's
And-
one line.
And since it takes, on launching a normal satellite, how long does it take you from launch to activation for a normal military satellite? It takes 2 to 6 to 8 weeks before it's operational.
And that's precisely the problem.
Getting it up fast doesn't
You have to
make
improve
the
that.
function fast.
Well,
What you need to do is have the pilots fly them up there.
What you do is you have to have priority.
Yeah.
You have to have smaller ones, you have to also have them to hide them. The way you hide them is the way you hide a needle. You don't hide a needle in a haystack, because you can find that real easy. You hide a needle in a box of needles.
Conclusion that we've all just come to is that if we're going to have a true military space plane, something that operates very frequently, very low cost, not the $2,000 a pound that Space Command thinks is low cost access to space, and not the EELV replacement that Space Command is currently proposing, then it's probably going to come out of the other half of the Air Force, the Air Combat Command. And so we need to be ways to talk to those people. Do either of you have any comments or objections to that idea?
Well, I have very little interest in military space planning. I have a great deal of interest in operational responsive space lab. I think that we have a critical need to be able to replace capabilities in space in the event of wartime. The simplest, there are actually a number of scenarios that one can look at that one can believably see us losing virtually all of our space-based capability. The simplest one to understand is the Korean Peninsula. If we get engaged in a ground war on the Korean Peninsula, it would be almost inconceivable that North Korea would not blow up nukes on the edge of space. We know for sure that they have the capability of doing at least a few. And we also know that they have a very large industrial era army that would roll over our crippled army like they were toy soldiers.
Now, in terms of nukes and nuke detonation in space, how is that? It'll affect different areas of space differently, and so.
Well, exactly. And remember, they don't have just one. Listen, there's a number of things that I assume nobody in this room knows, okay? Let me just give a list of a few of those, okay? None of us know how efficient the North Korean weapons are likely to be. Okay, efficiency relates to this type of EMP that they push out. No one knows exactly how high in the upper atmosphere they can put these things, okay? Because as far as I know, they've never tested a missile straight up for us to observe that capability. None of us know precisely how shielded our military satellites are. Okay, we can guess. They're probably not very shielded because we know what they weigh and what they have on them.
The specs are probably not very high, and the question is how well do you meet your specs? Because how well,
Exactly. So
how well they test it
all
against
these
the specs.
things are related factors. But one can guess at these things, and one would think that blowing up a nuke over North Korea would do us a fair amount of damage. Perhaps even completely blind us. Might completely take out the GPS system.
I could see
That's
that.
pretty likely. And if they do several of them spaced out over a period of hours, you can really do enormous amount of damage. Can do a lot. Can take out our ability to communicate securely. And so we can have soldiers on the ground without the ability to know where they are, to communicate securely with each other and with headquarters. Completely
taken out before they get to a detonation
Well,
outlet.
all right, 2 out of 10 make it.
So,
Who knows?
I mean, who knows?
There's
Your
no
guess
way,
is good as mine.
there's no way of knowing. In a situation like that, you will, there's not much you can do in the early hours of such a situation. We can, operationally responsive spaceflight, if it's done right, can create the ability to replace those capabilities in space in a matter of days rather than a matter of weeks. Operation responsive space is not just about launch. Launch is the piece of it that most of us are most interested in. It's about having enough of the people, about having the satellite ready to go, about having all of these pieces so that you can rapidly replace all this capability.
Another question about the nukes is that there would be severe debate whether that was, in fact, even an act of war. Because what that as an attack or damage to an object in space remains undefined in terms of the international agreement.
I think it's a fairly safe assumption that the United States would not respond to nukes in space by killing the population of North Korea. I also think it's a fairly safe assumption that we would respond to their using nukes against the ground target by killing everybody in North Korea. And I think they must know that.
That's why Kim Jong-il is dug so deep.
Huh?
That's why he's dug himself so deep into the ground there in Mars.
There is no place deep enough.
Okay, the problem with operationally